東京2日目始まりました。皆様おはようございます。おはようございます。オンラインの皆様もおはようございます。今日もよろしくお願いします。さて、AdTech東京2日目が始まりました。こんな困難なコロナ禍の状況ではありますが、このように開催できたことを本当に感謝いたします。スポンサーの皆様、スピーカーの皆様、ボードメンバーの皆様、そして何よりも参加いただいている参加者の皆様に心より感謝申し上げたいと思います。ありがとうございます。さて、今回のAdTech東京ハイブリッド開催ということで2日目を迎えるんですが、ちなみに今リアル会場いる方でもオンライン見たよって方ってどれぐらい？すごい。このリアル会場にいる方でもオンラインを昨日どこかで見たっていう方が今7割近くいらっしゃいまして、本当にニューノーマルを感じております。実際昨日もですね、会場でこの国際フォーラムの会場にいらっしゃるのにパソコンでオンラインで見てる方とかもいらっしゃって、本当に新しい時代をまさに目の前でハイブリッドを感じました。さて、我々としても12年目でこういった初めてのハイブリッド開催でいろいろ正直不安はあったんですけれども、昨日の初日ですねは、延べで、オンラインとリアル両方だ3800人の方に見ていただいておりまして、実は去年までのリアルのみだとこのカンファレンス会場全部マックスでも1600人しか入らなかったんですよ、実は。というのもあって、倍以上の方に見ていただいているという新しい時代を感じております。さて、こんな形ではございますが、昨日に引き続きですね、またラーニングぜひ意識していただければと思います。昨日のオープニング、後で見逃しも見れるので、ご覧になってない方はぜひリンクから見ていただければと思うんですけれども、昨日の朝、乙部大輔さんと一緒にこちらに登壇させていただきまして、新しいラーニングは何でしたか？学んだことをアウトプットしてみましょうというワークを少し行いました。こちらぜひですね、今年のAdTech東京11月6日までございます。2日間だけではなくてオンラインの見逃し配信もございますので、ぜひこの機会にですね、各セッションでどんなラーニングがあったか、セッション聞き流してなんか学んだって形で終わるのではなくて、ぜひ皆様の資産にストックにしていただきたく、そのラーニングを意識して参加いただければと思います。で、そのコツとしてはぜひ書き留める。何を学んだか、新しく学んだことを、その1時間で新しく学んだことをぜひスマホでもメモでも何でもいいですので止めておければいただければと思います。で、ポイントとしては、もしも大丈夫でしたらアウトプットをすることをお勧めしています。自分のメモでもいいんですけれども、SNS とかで発信するとその分自分のある意味いい意味でプレッシャーになるかと思いますので、ぜひ学びはアウトプットいただければと思います。ということで、早速ですが、キーノートの方に参りたいと思います。今回もですね、今日もですね、アメリカと中継つないでおります。去年のキーノートで、去年6つキーノートを行ったんですが、とっても好評で、今年もぜひこの中で来日いただきたいと思ったんですが、こういった状況なので、中継で今ニュージャージーとつないでおります。ちょっとオープニングにジェンと挨拶したいと思いますね。Good morning, Jenn. Oh no, it's good evening for you. おはようございます。So what time is it now in your time?
It is 9 o'clock at night.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry that I wanted to have you here on site again this year, but
well, there is no place I would rather be than in Tokyo with all of you. I love Japan. I miss it so much.
ありがとうございます。一昨年初来日しまして、すごくそこから親日になってくれて、今回の、キーノートにもたくさん日本のデータ出てきますので、ぜひチェックいただければと思っております。この後終わった後少し QA も行いますので、ぜひそちらもご覧ください。では、こちらから先、基調講演につきましてはビデオで配信いたしますので、字幕はついております。Okay, so we welcome to your stage. それでは VTR ご覧ください。ありがとうございます。
Ohio, and welcome to this session called Innovation Through Inclusivity. A big thank you to Comexposium for having me with you today. My name is Jennifer Willey, and I am the CEO and founder of Wet Cement and Advanced Women at Work Japan. I am thrilled to be here with all of you today to talk about inclusivity. And I view this as like a complex math equation where there are many different variables that need to be addressed before you can solve the problem. Inclusivity can mean many things to different people. It can be focusing on bringing teams together across diverse ways, whether that means based on gender or race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, abilities or disabilities. There are so many ways that you can look at this. But for our time together today, we will be focused on womenomics, and that is gender equity in the workplace. Now, as I am sure many of you know, Prime Minister Abe had set out with his womenomics goal to have 30% of leaders in Japan by this year. But that goal was just changed because based on where things are, there is no possibility of it being at 30% by 2020, which means the country's goals are being pushed back by more than a decade because as of today, you're only halfway to that goal. Currently, the latest report from the World Economic Forum shows that you are just at 15% of women in leadership roles. And that's why we'll be talking about how our company helps companies like yours around the world to unlock fearlessness, to accelerate innovation, inclusivity, and growth for their companies. We'll share with you original insights that we have from research that we conducted in partnership with behavioral scientists at Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania. Then we will have our ways that we help you to take action so that you can make a difference either in your organization, if you are in a leadership role, or for your own career. And hopefully many of this will be helpful for you when you go back home. And then finally, we'll share with you a little bit of our experience so that you'll understand why it is that I am here joining you from the United States in the state of New Jersey. While I wish I could be in beautiful Tokyo with all of you, I cannot be allowed to be there because of coronavirus, unfortunately. But a little bit about me quickly. I spent more than 20 years working at companies like Yahoo, AOL, PwC, and now working in-house with the trade desk to help to advance innovation as well as build in-house programs around women's leadership. I combined that with the research that I had mentioned earlier that we've done first across professionals, and then also working individually with companies. We use that to have served as a gender equality expert. I'm proud that I was the International Women's Day featured speaker for 2020 this year, and then worked very closely with organizations like Credit Saison and KPI Solutions, and many others that you can see here. Global brands like eBay and Walmart and Johnson & Johnson and many others to help them understand how can they build a women's leadership program as well as an inclusive environment and collaborative culture so that they could advance their mission. At Wet Cement, we always focus on what we call the 5 fearless fundamentals, and that is what I will be walking you through here today. Those are courage, control, confidence, communication, and connections. So let's get started. Now, it's interesting when you look at some of the global research that's been done outside of Japan, and that's what we will spend a lot of time today looking at some of those global best practices so that you can apply them to your organizations. Now, one study that was done looked at the diversity measures across 3,000 different companies over the period of 2001 to 2014. And what they found were that those companies that were more diverse across 4 different dimensions, they had more women and minorities who were CEOs. They had more women who were in charge of profit and loss responsibilities. They also had more supportive employee policies that helped to support all different types of diverse employees. And also they had programs to hire disabled employees. Those companies that scored highest across these 4 different diversity measures were more likely to develop more new products. In fact, they had 2 new patents that were issued each year. And what is very important, considering that right now we are going through a global pandemic and we are unsure what impact that will have on markets and companies' financial situation in the future, those companies that were most diverse fared the best in the 2008 financial crisis. And so we want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to be as successful as possible during this difficult time. Now, what's interesting is that those companies who had higher diversity scores actually had a much higher percentage of their revenue that came from what is called innovation revenue. And that means dollars that came into the company based on products that were launched in only the last 3 years. And so it's those companies with the higher diversity scores that had 40% of their innovation revenue was coming in and helping their company, as opposed to if they had less diversity, only 26% was coming from innovation revenue. And finally, we see that it's also good for business overall. One landmark study done by Forbes looked at 600 business decisions across 200 teams, and they found that 87% of the time they were making better business decisions, and that led to 60% better results. Sounds like the kind of results I would assume every single one of you would want to see for your companies. And so what's happening globally is that this is leading to just a huge boom, especially in the United States, for roles that are focused on building a diverse, equitable, and inclusive company. So the titles of what many of these companies are looking for now and building in-house in their organizations is called diversity, equity, and inclusion. And if you look here, just as it relates to one of the job sites in the United States, what you will find is that when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion roles, that there are more than 1,035 roles which have been posted in just the last 6 months. This has been an explosion of companies recognizing that they can't only aim to create more diversity and inclusion, they have to put the resources and the investment behind making that happen. And so in many of these companies, they will hire this talent and then they will bring in a number of global experts and consultants who can help them. Now, we did some original research with Japanese business leaders in the AdTech world. And what we found was that while female Japanese business leaders had said that their companies were very inclusive, of those Japanese leaders who were not women, we found that only 30% of male Japanese AdTech leaders are saying that their companies are very inclusive. That means that there is a great opportunity for us to spend the time that we have together focused on how we can help your team to be more fearless. So let's get started here. First and foremost, I want you to focus on measuring what you treasure. So we like to say that if you don't measure it, then you don't treasure it or value it. And this is one of the hardest things that we see for companies around the world, where they are unsure of where they are because they haven't done the work, they haven't done the audit to look at the numbers and the statistics to see where their company is today, and then by division and by role, how many people are male versus female. And you need to understand, just like with any type of a map, where you are today to understand where it is that you need to go. And so we strongly recommend that even if the results are not good, you need to see what is behind the numbers, because then you can ask the difficult questions and start to solve for it. So if you see that the biggest challenge is in one certain division, you can work there. Or if it's one transition from one role to the next, you can work there on solving for that problem. Now, for many companies globally, they use a platform called Gender Fair, where this is a company that helps organizations understand how they fare as it relates to gender equality. And so they have an assessment that companies can take. They try to make it very easy to give you a sense of where you're at. But what we would strongly recommend is you want to use an assessment like this internally to look at the core 4 areas that you need to recognize what that audit is for you today. Those 4 gender equality measures recommended by Gender Fair are leadership, employee policies, advertising, and purpose. So let's start off by looking at these 4 different areas that you can measure across all. So first, as it relates to leadership, you want to look at what kinds of leadership programs do you have in place for women in your organization? How many women executives or C-suite members do you have today? So women in the roles of chief executive officer, chief financial officer, chief marketing officer. Most companies will have a woman who's in an executive role as it relates to human resources or human relations, and it's important to expand beyond that. You also want to look at the gender composition of your board. Now, for Fortune 500 companies in the United States, that benchmark is 20%. So 1 out of 5 board members are women today. And then also, of course, looking at management across the board. When it relates to employee policies, you want to look at things for Japanese companies like, is there paid maternity leave? So those mothers being allowed to take off time with their children so that they can give them that foundation they need and then come back to work at the right time. But do you also have paid paternity leave? So can fathers take off time when their babies are born to help get the family home and that child on the right track? And do you encourage male leaders and men at every level to take that time to be with their family? That is one of the biggest shifts in the United States that is helping from a gender equality perspective. So we strongly recommend that you do that. Of course, the best companies in Japan, like Shiseido, are those companies that have on-site childcare, making it very easy for women to be able to come back to work. They also look for lactation rooms in case those mothers are nursing mothers for their young child. You'd want to have that gender pay gap study that becomes a part of your employee policies, where you will share out the results. Be honest, transparent about where you are today and where you'll go. And then you also want to provide support as it relates to sexual harassment for your employees. Now, another thing that we see companies doing that are leading the way when it comes to advertising is they are doing a few things related to advertising and marketing. So they want to make sure that the brand is positively breaking gender stereotypes. You want to make sure that you're not objectifying women or using them as a sexual object in any way. And of course, you want to make sure that you are not depicting gender-based violence. And then finally, as it relates to purpose, some of the numbers that you could be looking at are you investing from a social responsibility perspective in community-based programs that focus on women, girls, and gender equality? And will you actually publish the financial contributions that you are making to those programs? The companies around the world that are taking a stand across these 4 measures are the ones that are able to attract the best talent and then also maintain and build loyalty with great female leaders. And then they see the results as it relates to the bottom line. So now let's focus on control. This is one of the biggest areas around the world that companies are recognizing they need to invest money. And there has been a lot of talk over the course of the past 5 years around harassment and sexual harassment specifically, but then also as it relates to gender harassment of women being treated differently, regardless of it being sexual in nature, but just making them feel like second-class citizens or that they are not part of the most important team of leaders in the organization. And then there's a topic that's gained a lot of steam in the last three years around bias. And a lot of this came out of the global Me Too phenomenon that happened. And we focus on things like affinity bias. Affinity bias is wanting to spend time and work with people who are like you. Think about it. Do you have any kind of affinity bias? We all do. And so it's not about understanding what you're not aware of. So that's unconscious bias, is recognizing that you may say things or do things and not even realize that you are biased against, whether it is women or based on an age or a sexual preference or any of the other marginalized groups that are out there. But it's about recognizing that once you can see those biases that you have, that you can move towards what is called conscious inclusion. And that is taking the steps to include people in meetings, include people in team outings, including people to share their voice, which we'll talk about a little bit more in the communication section that's coming up. So one of the best ways to do this is to equalize leadership development. And you want to do that by gender. So in many companies, those folks who are recognized as potential leaders might be primarily male. And so they are the ones who get the support and are included in training programs and given that opportunity to climb up and rise above in the organization. And that's where it's been fascinating how there's research around what is being called the broken rung here in the United States. So if you think of people climbing up the career ladder, what they're finding is that for women, one of those rungs of the ladder to climb up is broken. And what that broken rung is that first promotion to become a manager. Now, while you may look around and think that everything is equal, research that was conducted this past year by McKinsey and Company found that for every 100 men that are promoted to management for the first time, only 72 women are promoted. And so this is where it becomes that broken rung to get more women into senior leadership. And so start thinking about, does your company offer leadership training, management training to get women to that first manager role? This is the kind of structure and strategy that you need to have so that you can help women on their journey. And this is what we do at Wet Cement, where we provide full service solution, strategy development, training, coaching, and content so that we can help companies build that roadmap and learn what they should be measuring along the way. You'll also want to be delivering live programs, whether that is interactive right now due to the pandemic or hopefully at some point in person. You also want to be sure that you're coaching your team. So coaching the women on what they could and should be doing to rise up within your organization, but also coaching those men on how they can eliminate bias, be more supportive leaders, and advance everyone around them so that your business grows and thrives. And then finally, you want to make sure that you're providing ongoing content. And this is what we do for our clients by doing all of their employee communications and creating videos. And that's because new global research out shows that when people leave a training session, if there is not ongoing reinforcement for it, the majority of people will forget what they've learned in just 3 days. So you need to have this type of full service approach. And that's why when we work with clients, and we would recommend that whoever it is that you work with to find a way to make your organization more inclusive, you do a combination of all of these 8 elements. Group training, using interactive tools, and we'll show you an example. Having small group exercises, even if it's being conducted online via video conference, and doing that by using breakout rooms. Giving people individual exercises so they can sit and think and understand how this is impacting their own career. Providing that video content, giving them resource guides that they can refer back to, and then of course, having coaching as an important part of that process. So now let's shift to confidence. Now, there is a term that is being used around the world and has been a lot of focus, and that is called imposter syndrome. And this is that area of confidence where you may feel like a fake, a fraud, or that you will be found out. Perhaps if you relate to imposter syndrome in any way, it's that you feel like you've only gotten to your position based on luck, timing, or that people like you because you have a great personality. The reality is that the vast majority of people who suffer from imposter syndrome are women. And that is why it is incredibly important to understand what this means and how, as a leader, as well as a woman in the workforce, what you can do about this. Now, if you look at Amazon, for example, in the United States, and the number of books that are out there on imposter syndrome, there are pages and pages and pages of books on the topic alone to help people understand what they can do, as well as to help managers and leaders understand what to do. There are 142 books right now on imposter syndrome that are for sale in the United States, but there are none of those available in Japan. And so this is an opportunity, again, to learn and teach your teams about what this means and what they could be doing to shift their mindset so that they can do everything that they can to drive your company and your ability to innovate forward with time. One of those tips that we teach in all of our classes is that people who suffer from imposter syndrome tend to be perfectionists. They are scared that they will be judged. They feel anxiety when they have to share their ideas, and they only want to do so when they know it is just perfect. And so one of those things that you can do as a leader is to encourage your team to take the leap and to just jump off and share when they are not 100% ready or knowing that it's perfect, but when they are 80% of the way there. And that when they're at that point, that they know it's not perfect, but they can learn and iterate and improve with time. So let's move on to communication. Now, one of the things that we did for this session specifically was some original research with Japanese business leaders. And one of those questions that really stood out to me was we asked Do I sometimes hesitate to speak up at group meetings? Now, we had an equal number of respondents of women and men. As I had mentioned earlier, those imposters are much more likely to be scared to share their ideas. But what we saw here was that 64% of women say that they hold back their great ideas, but only 20% of men will hesitate to speak up in group meetings. So understanding how communication is impacting women in your company is critical. Now, there is something in communication research that's emerged over the last 20 years, which is called the double bind. And what this means is that in order for a person to be seen as a leader, they need to have what are known as stereotypical male leadership or communication styles or attributes. Those communication styles are being clear, direct, decisive, and assertive. Close your eyes a second and think to who are those most enviable, admirable leaders that you think of in the business world. They will typically have these traits that are normally associated with male leaders. For women to be respected in the workplace, they also need to act and communicate in a way that's known as stereotypically female, which means they need to be feminine. They need to be pro-social, which means they're looking out for the best interests of the team or the organization. And what the double bind shows is that women in business who do not combine both of these are not successful. So you cannot just focus on always helping each other and being more feminine by being quieter and soft-spoken and not speaking up. You must be able to combine acting and communicating like a woman who cares about the organization and other people, who has warmth, who has empathy. But you must also be clear, direct, decisive, and assertive. And so one way that we coach female leaders to do this is to, when they are having a conversation or at a client meeting, is to always start by connecting as a human and as a woman and being kind and caring and asking about how they are doing and their family is doing. But then when it comes time to talk about business itself, to stay focused on solving the business problem and don't apologize for anything that you want to share. Don't hold back those brilliant ideas that you have. Now, for all leaders, especially those of you who may be using video conferencing more because of the pandemic, it's more important now than ever to hear every voice. And here are 5 ways that you can do that. So first off, you can use polls in your meeting. So if you're using a platform like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or any of the other video conferencing software that's out there, you are able to embed polls in there. You can even use independent companies like Mentimeter.com to do the same. You can check out the chat for that. You also want to make sure that you're asking questions of people who are in your meetings. So if we were live all right now from a video conference perspective, I would be asking you questions in the chat. So for example, how many of you think that your company is really inclusive? If you say yes, put yes in the chat. If no, put no in the chat. And that way everyone has a chance to share and stay involved throughout the entire meeting. You could also use nonverbal feedback for that. So you can say, if the answer is yes, then give me a thumbs up. If the answer is no, then don't put your hand up. Or if the answer is yes, raise your hand. Or if the answer is no, keep your hand down. Another way to be a great inclusive leader is to call on specific attendees in any meeting, whether it is in person or virtual. So if you know that there are women in your team who do not speak up as often, call them out. Ask them a question by name. You can say, Yuko, I want to get your perspective. What do you think about that? And that will give her the opportunity and the floor to share her ideas. And then finally, if you're doing a virtual meeting, we strongly recommend that you are using breakout rooms on a consistent basis so people have that opportunity to share their ideas in a smaller format. When the world opens up and all of your meetings are in person again, we also advise you to use methods from design thinking workshops, where everybody gets to contribute their ideas and puts it on Post-it notes, puts it up on the board, just like you see in this example of a design thinking workshop. And then once all those ideas are up there, everybody will get some stickers, just like you see the blue and red circle stickers in this picture. And they put a sticker on the best ideas that they think will be most powerful for the business. This allows everyone to have a voice, both in the idea generation as well as in decision making throughout your organization. And as I had mentioned, you'll use polling technology so that you can get everyone to weigh in, even if they're not saying anything at all. And so here's an example of one that we like called Mentimeter.com. And it's really important to use this because, as you'll see, this was in a recent session that we did that was on whether or not women are being interrupted in sessions and all of the research that's out there. And as we saw in this recent workshop that we conducted, women are interrupted at work 3 times more than men. And so this is why you want to find those ways to allow that communication. And finally, connections. Build those connections within your organization across 3 different dimensions: networking, mentoring, and the kinds of diverse suppliers and partners that you are working with. So let's break down what this means from a connections. Now, based on our original research, when we asked women if they view themselves as better than average at networking and building those relationships that will advance their business success, only half of those women said that they felt they were strong at networking or better than other people. That is a failing grade, and it's very problematic because networking is one of the most important things to expand business opportunities, as well as that will lead to promotions within an organization. So we like to help shift women's mindsets as it relates to networking. And we like to think of it as you are giving gifts when you're networking. So women do traditionally like giving gifts to other people. We like serving and helping others before we help ourselves. And so if you can get into that gift-giving mindset and think that whenever there's a networking opportunity, you're focused first on how you can help the other person rather than focus on what you'll get out of it. This makes it much easier for women to view networking as a positive and not something that makes them uncomfortable. Now, as it relates to mentoring, this is incredibly important and one of those areas that we see a major problem around the world. So from our research, we found that men are much more likely to have a mentor, but also they are substantially higher at mentoring other people. And so that means, in most cases, because of affinity bias and wanting to spend time with people who are like ourselves, it means that there are more men being mentored by men and women are being left behind. So women, who are listening, make sure that you find a mentor, someone who is several years ahead of you in your career, and not just one, many of them. Find male mentors, find female mentors, and ask them, what did they learn across their journey? What mistakes did they make that you can learn from? Have them help you talk through difficult problems or challenges at work. But also, if you have been working for even just a few years, make sure that you are mentoring other women along the way. You may think you have nothing to add, but I assure you, you do. And for all of the men who are watching, please make a commitment to yourself to start mentoring women in their journeys. And if you feel like you don't have enough time to do so, you can actually create something called a mentor circle. This is where you and another leader mentor on an ongoing basis a group of more junior associates so that they can see how you look at problems differently, but then you'll also build strong relationships between those younger employees that will only make them stronger, and it'll allow them to mentor each other as time goes on. Or alternatively, you can do what I've seen some of the best leaders do. And that is, if you feel like you don't have time to take on any new mentees or proteges, you can host a virtual lunch or an in-person lunch when it happens, and invite up to 15 or 20 younger people in your organization to join, and let them know that you will be sharing your insights, your lessons learned, advice on what they could and should be doing in their career, and that they can come with questions along the way, and that you will help them throughout. This is one way to make a big impact with 15 or 20 different people all at the same time. And then finally, as it relates to connections, look at the partners and suppliers that your company is working with. Are they diverse? Are they all men-led companies? Do they have diversity in their ranks? These are questions that you want to start asking so that you can make sure that your company will be able to get access to the most innovative ideas and services. And one way that you can do this is by working with women-owned businesses. So there is an organization called We Connect International that helps make it easier for women-owned businesses to connect with companies like all of yours. And there are global organizations like Intel and Johnson & Johnson that are leading the way on bringing this to Japan to make it easy for you to make sure that you are also working with women-owned businesses in the Asia Pacific region. So we've covered off on all of those things that you can be doing, from finding those ways to have courage to look at the numbers of your companies, where you stand today and where you need to go. How you can take control and give support, training, and resources to your teams, both the women as well as the men, so they can understand how to be allies and step up and say something to help women in the organization. We focus on confidence and learning about the imposter syndrome and how that might be holding back some of the women in your organization, the importance of connecting with others, both inside your organization as well as outside, and of course, communication, which is at the core of everything to bring the best ideas forward. Now, for joining today's session, you can access a special material in our exclusive material section on the Wet Cement website. You can find that address here at wetcement.com. And you'll use the passcode FEARLESS to access that information. You can also learn much more on our Advance Women at Work Japan website. where we have information about how we are helping companies be able to very easily put these methods into practice. And so with that, I would like to say arigatou gozaimasu to Comexposium, and of course to Yuko Furiuchi, who has been a wonderful supporter of gender equality and women's leadership in Japan and beyond. And a big thank you to all of you for spending time and being here with us. And I would love it if you have questions. Yuko will be joining us again. And so if you have any questions, I will be able to answer them for you. You can also use your phone to use that QR code and link with me through linkedin.com so that we can continue the conversation. And of course, you can send us an email at info@wet-cement.com. So with that, I welcome you back, Yuko, and thank you so much for having me.
さて、ありがとうございました。昨日の朝のキーノート2つ見ていただいた方、もし見ていらっしゃらない方いたら、そこをつなげてこの3つ見ていただくとすごくさらに理解が深まるかなと思います。Thank you, Jenn, for a great presentation. ありがとうございます。
My pleasure.
インポスター、ありがとうございます。インポスター症候群について結構コメントが SNS でもあったんで、そこをちょっと一つ伺ってみたいと思います。So Jenn, we got one question for you that the story about imposter syndrome is very interesting, and also I understand that unconsciousness is a very important issue as well. So my question would be, is there any typical sign of imposter syndrome if who is suffering from it? Can we feel that someone is suffering from imposter syndrome?
Yeah, so the easiest way to see it in someone else, so if you're a manager, the easiest way to see it is if there's actually a few things. Number one, if someone is not going for that next step in their career, if they are not trying to get the promotion that they deserve, that is a big one. And another one is when you have someone on your team who over prepares. They are very hard on themselves and they feel like they are a failure unless they get everything just right. And what ends up happening is they burn themselves out, but they also burn out everybody else on the team because they are exhausting to be around.
今の質問がインポスターシンドローム何かこうパッと見た特徴って陥った人にあるのかって伺ってみたんですけども、一つが昇進を断る、それに値するに断るっていうのと、あともう一つがちょっとやりすぎな方についてはちょっと注意した方がいいっていうふうにいただいてます。後で細かいのは記事にはアップいたします。Okay, so time is up. Thank you, Jenn.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
ありがとうございました。ではですね、続きましてのキーノートに参りたいと思います。続きましては、こちらのリアル会場東京国際フォーラムに3名のゲストの方にお越しいただいています。こちらを楽しみにしてくださった方も多いのではないでしょうか。タイトルは、欲望のメディアが見つけるニューノーマル時代のインサイトと題しまして、博報堂島さん、そしてビリー編集長今尾さん、ブルータス編集長の西田さんにお越しいただいている編集長セッションとなっております。それでは皆様、よろしくお願いいたします。